ceasefire that was meant to start at 4 p.m. today, our time. And it was met with some scepticism. And Zelensky has said that this was already broken, that there continued to be shots being fired, and that it wasn't a real truce. And there's the question mark over why he did it, which seems sort of transparent. Experts in the Daily Telegraph story are saying that it was to curry favour with Trump, who had requested that both sides sign up to this ceasefire as he desperately tries to broker a deal between the two countries. Now, Zelensky had immediately said he would go for a ceasefire, and Putin hadn't. So this looks a lot like it was essentially a PR trick to curry favour with President Trump over that, and actually he's not been carrying it out at all. But the danger about this going forward is that, Donald Trump seems to take the talking points of Russia pretty easily, pretty casually. And will this mean that now Donald Trump can go out and say, well, see, Vladimir Putin did have a ceasefire, he did agree to stop firing, even though it looks like that's not quite what's happened on the ground.
But Esther, a ceasefire of 30 hours as opposed to 30 days, is that going to appease President Trump, who has said that, look, we're ready to walk away from this?
Yeah, patience is wearing thin. Unfortunately, Trump, because he set the precedent of bullying Ukraine and making them look like the parties that are unwilling to broker a peace, he's kind of set himself on the back foot. I don't think this ceasefire is going to curry much favour, because the unofficial deadline that we've been hearing from the White House with regards to the interest in brokering a peace between Ukraine and Russia is the end of this month, which is coming fast. But, Putin has form for doing things like this, calling a one-sided truce without having any actual bilateral discussions with the Ukrainians and then breaking it before. Back in January 2023, he, announced publicly a ceasefire for Orthodox Easter, Orthodox Christmas, and then broke it within a day. And he did the same with last month with the sort of 30-day partial ceasefire, which was again broken by the Kremlin. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort to buy himself some more time. But actually, because we don't actually know, thanks to the unpredictability of the Trump administration, how far they're willing to push Russia on this, and whether they're really willing, as they say, to arm Ukraine to the back teeth to finish the job if Russia doesn't come to the table. Putin is trying to make these small concessions, but whether the Trump administration is smart enough to realise that this is just another pathetic play and he's unlikely to stick by his word is another situation altogether. You have to feel quite sorry for Volodymyr Zelensky in all of this, because really not only has he been publicly humiliated for a war that he didn't start, but it looks like conversations around how to end this war are happening without Ukraine in the room, which is just mind-boggling.
We're just seeing recent pictures of Putin in Moscow celebrating Easter there. But this 30-hour ceasefire, which is non-existent, does it move anything forward at all? I mean, what's been the purpose of it?
I mean, I guess it's to try and give the aesthetic of being willing to have a ceasefire, which is what Donald Trump has been asking for. And you've got this on
one that's immediately broken.
Well, precisely, although, of course, a bit like Trump, President Putin lives in a parallel universe that doesn't seem to share ideas of truth and facts. Donald Trump came to power saying he would fix it within 100 days, which is rapidly approaching. And Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has been saying, well, actually, if they can't come to a deal, then maybe it's just not, our fight to broker. So the US is almost saying it might just step back from the whole thing and leave it to play out in Europe's hands, which is probably designed to alarm Zelensky, because I can't imagine that would upset Putin, because he has less of an enemy to fight in that situation.
Although there have been talks about increased US sanctions on Russia, which at a time where the ruble is actually strengthening, that could be the final nail in Russia's coffin. So we'll have to wait and see.
There is sort of the tariffs, could play into this, because I was reading some stuff of what's in the Russian media, and they're concerned that this attack on China will damage the oil price, because a significant fall in production will mean less oil is needed, supply and demand will be out of sync, that will cost Russia a lot of money.
Well, I mean, there are bigger questions of what if the Trump administration decides to put sanctions on countries that are buying Russian oil? So for the longest time, the Chinese and the Indians in particular have been buying Russian oil basically for next to nothing and selling it on to the Western world. If Trump says, actually, India, you need to stop doing this, that's the ruble, tanking overnight. So there are different ways to play this. On one hand, the unpredictability of the Trump administration does play in his favour, because it makes Putin make these token gestures. But on the other hand, we just don't know what to go off of. And if you're Ukraine, it's an extremely uncomfortable situation to be in.
OK, let's move to the Mail, the headline there, Ministers in WhatsApp plot to defy trans ruling. What's the detail behind this headline, Benjamin?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask Esther.
You can sip your water.
No, so Chris Bryant, who is a culture minister, is suggested, according to the Mail on Sunday, that they've been discussing a serious meeting in the next week of how to manage the interpretation of the Supreme Court ruling, which was that anybody that wasn't born biologically as a woman isn't recognised as it. So a gender recognition certificate or medical procedures don't alter how the law sees you. Now, this is a massive problem for places like hospitals, public toilets, all those kind of questions. It's a real headache for any government. And the suggestion the Mail is making is that several ministers are not acting publicly. So the government's publicly said that they welcome the ruling, it gives clarity, that we'd always supported this, but privately ministers are said to be discussing how to interpret it. And I think it is actually, many people welcomed it. Lots of trans protesters and their allies were out opposing it outside Parliament today, so there's certainly lots of support on the other side. The question is, this actually is an incredibly difficult decision because the gender recognition certificate, which was introduced under one of Blair's governments, means that your birth certificate sex can be changed according to how you identify if you go through a process which typically takes about 2 years. Those people tend to have had a medical transition. They often look like the gender they identify as. And so the idea that those people can't go in, for example, if they're a trans woman, into a women's toilets, sets all sorts of problems, and probably a serious amount of lawsuits are going to happen in both directions under this. So, I think lots of people felt the Supreme Court judgment was the conclusion, but actually it's opened a real nest.
Yeah, it does seem as if it's just the beginning, doesn't it? And especially with this article saying that Labour ministers are plotting to defy the ruling, so there's going to be some infighting, we can presume.
It's actually quite incredible because this should have been anticipated. It was very clear always where the Supreme Court was heading on in terms of this ruling, because this was in relation to the Equality Act of 2010. And it said, actually, this act set out protections for various people, including gender identity, your sex, obviously, religion, and all of that. It didn't suddenly conjure up this idea that a biological man is now a woman in the eyes of the law under this act. So it was actually, a clarification that many people, especially Keir Starmer being a barrister, should have expected. So Labour's kind of almost delayed response on this is quite a PR disaster, because there's so many public policy implications for this. With regards to the NHS, for example, how do you now have to have sort of a third or other room for people that are, male, like the women identifying but biologically male?
Suggestion for moving forward, isn't it?
But this is the thing, the line has been drawn. Yes, exactly. So it's now just moving. The line has now been drawn. You now have to move in the direction of the context that the law has set. But Labour's really slow response to this is what's quite concerning. I don't think it's any surprise that Keir Starmer chose this week of all weeks to be on holiday with his family. I'm sure he didn't want to be seen in interviews saying, actually, now is there 1%? But he doesn't celebrate Easter. He's Jewish. Is there now still 1%?
Yeah, his family is.
Well, yes, but he's never celebrated Easter. He's not a Christian. Anyway, but he didn't want to be doing interviews saying, do you still think there's 1% of women that have penises, right? He didn't want any of that PR nightmare. But Labour should have seen this coming, and they should have been far more prepared than this. And I think this has massive public policy implications, that it's very concerning that the government of the day doesn't already have a way to address this, even before this ruling came out.
But let's just be clear. This actually undoes the 2004 Gender Recognition
It doesn't
Act.
undo it.
Well, it does, because what that did was it allowed you to change your sex on your birth certificate, and that would determine the decision on things like the spaces you could go in.
That doesn't make you, but that doesn't biologically, a piece of paper doesn't make a man a woman.
But in reality, in day-to-day life in these spaces, that was the deciding factor.
No, but that's not what it was. Hold on. This was based on the Equality Act of 2010 to protect individuals based on their gender identity, their religion, their sex, and all the other protected characteristics under the law. The gender recognition certificate does not somehow make a man a woman. No amount of makeup or tucking or witchcraft was going to conjure up a different biological identity to the one you're born as.
But it did in law, because it allowed you to change your legal sex, and that would be then how you were recognised. Now, the Equality Act, which is why the Supreme Court came to this judgment, had always said that there are exceptions for biological sex. And
is there a difference between legal sex and biological sex?
Well, in the law, there has been.
No, there isn't.
So
There's just sex.
But the question now is that You know, I always think of someone who I knew called April Ashley, who was one of the first person in this country to have gender physical reassignment, and she had that in the 1960s. Now, she lived until her 70s. She was a lingerie model. That's how assumed it was that she was naturally a woman. The idea that you put an elderly trans woman in a men's toilet, you know, I think that's
But
highly
that's not what we're saying.
And
We're saying there has to be a third option.
Ruling says.
There has to be a third option. At the end of the day, there is no difference between legal sex and biological sex. It's just sex.
We're running out
Sorry.
of time. But I think that the thing is that the gender recognition certificate doesn't really...
It's
hold any
recognition.
water now.
It's not.
Yeah,
It's not a magical wand.
It's not binding anymore.
It's a piece of paper.
OK, we could go on for hours, clearly. Thank you very much. For the moment, we are going to take a break. Coming up, why the government's being accused of bending the knee to China and risking the UK's security. More on that and other stories when we come back.
They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
A historic day here today.
Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky security and defence editor. I've covered Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent. Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
The Premier League Run-In is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock, with a crucial fixture in the race for Europe. Saturday, the unrelenting drama heats up as both Aston Villa and Newcastle chase Champions League qualification.
An opportunity neither want to squander.
This is the Premier League Run-In, live on NBC and Peacock.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News.
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Benjamin Butterworth and Esther Craighew. Let's take a look at the Express front page, and the bold headline, Bending Knee to China Risks UK Security. The Express their take on UK relationships with China. This is following on from a previous article by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, saying that, we should have a relationship with China. She's off for a visit to Washington this week. So that is probably at odds, her saying that, with then, going off to the United States when President Trump is starting a trade war with said China.
She's being forced to walk a tightrope when, our closest, presumably, ally is openly engaging in a trade war with China. The complication is that our trade with China has been increasing by about 10% every year. And the current main worry is actually when the steel regulations lapse in 2026, the influx of Chinese steel, which will basically kill off whatever little steel industry we have, notwithstanding the fact that our energy is too expensive and our steel industry is extremely uncompetitive. So there are various economic considerations at play here, which prevents the Chancellor from saying, actually, we despise China, they're an adversary, we need to follow the US's leads, because we don't have as much leverage. And that's the main problem that she's facing. On the national security concerns, of course, there are issues with how much access we allow Chinese companies to public data, and that should always take precedence over anything else. But unfortunately, Rachel Reeves is not in an enviable position because, we are in a lot of debt. Much of that debt is owned by China. We are one of the only countries that's never defaulted on our debt, and I don't think the Chinese or anyone is expecting us to. So she has to be quite sensible here. The question is, how do you encourage domestic economic growth while taking seriously the national security threats of China, but maintaining a cozy economic relationship? It's not an easy thing to do. And with the increased tariffs on the US, the UK is looking like one of the last few open economies that the Chinese have left to continue to trade
Benjamin,
with.
it is a tightrope that she is walking. Is now the time to be seeking closer relationships with China?
Well, Britain can't seem to make its mind up because it's not many years since George Osborne and David Cameron hosted a state visit for Xi Jinping, and we weren't even having these questions. And I think what China has done very effectively is it's anchored itself in our resources like steel, like lots of real estate. It's sought to get lots of data, as Esther mentions. And that's given it a power in Britain that we're now recognising is dangerous and is a risk. And I think a lot of Western economies, and this is kind of the argument that Donald Trump's putting, for which there is certainly some value, is that we have become reliant on the manufacturing and production of a country that is explicitly trying to overtake us, to overstate us, which is trying to undermine us. And so, in the last 30 years, the price of lots of things, televisions, washing machines, are a fraction of what they used to be because of Chinese manufacturing. We've all benefited from that, our economies have. But now is China so powerful that it poses an existential threat? I think the reality that the Chancellor faces is that when our economy is stagnant and has been for some time, and there aren't many glimmers of hope, bearing in mind the barriers we put with our biggest trading partner, the EU, then does she have much choice to, as she says, engage with China? And she called it very foolish to cut off China. Well, I think if you were looking at her options for where the growth is going to come from, then the huge foreign investment that China offers to Britain is clearly one of those few opportunities that we have, and we have quite quickly.
And I think the biggest problem she has is we haven't protected any of our key industries, unlike the Americans who have and are continuing to do so. The Americans have options. We do not. We don't have, we have very expensive energy. We have the highest industrial energy price in the developed world. A lot of our key industries, manufacturing industries, have just fallen by the wayside. So we don't have the options that America has. That's the problem.
Esther and Benjamin, thank you very much for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next week looks changeable with widespread showers or longer spells of rain, but eastern parts in particular can expect some quite sunny days. Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Hebrides will have a mild, rather murky and damp start tomorrow, while the bulk of Britain will be sunny with a patchy frost. The far southeast may see a few showers. The morning looks mostly fine once the patchy early rain in the far north and west fades, but southern Britain, Northern Ireland and the west of Ireland can expect a few showers.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by